The storyline of the Ruined King was one of the most anticipated stories in League of Legends. That story remained open for years, and everyone was waiting for the day it would be told from the perspective of the Ruined King. Of course, that all changed in 2021, when it was announced that not only is the king a bit younger than everyone expected, but also that this storyline would be told throughout the entire year, with all of the new champions of 2021 adding more twists and turns to the entire arc. So since we know that all of this should get some kind of resolution at the end, especially since it is also getting its own game, suddenly a new question rises. Where will Riot look next? You see, if there is one thing Riot does really well, it is keeping their stories open. I don't think there is a single champion whose story was closed. Everyone is just happily waiting for their next update, because every single champion has something to do on Runeterra. And so instead of salvaging the stories and putting something quickly together, they can actually choose which storyline they want to explore next. And in today's video, I want to talk about 5 of the more interesting ones. Once again, keep in mind that there are a lot of unresolved stories in League of Legends. We still don't know what happened to the ancient giants of Ionia. We also know that something will happen to Lissandra and the Watchers. They can't stay frozen there forever. And we know about a lot of side characters who will definitely get their own stories later. Like Faye, who's one of the most fleshed out standalone characters. And besides her, there are many more. So, to make things a little bit more interesting, I picked 5 unresolved stories which many of you may not even know about. So without further ado, let's talk about what can Riot explore next. Even though these are in no particular order, for number 5 I picked the one that's a bit more obvious. The story of Sylas in the Faljord. Now we know that the story of Sylas will end with what we have seen in the cinematic. Even though this was never confirmed anywhere, literally everything else that appeared in the Warrior cinematic did become canon. And since at the end of Sylas' story it was revealed that he did travel to the Faljord, I think it's clear that's what's going to happen. But in case people don't know, after escaping Demacia, Sylas traveled north to the Faljord, because from the villages around the borders, he heard that the Faljord holds some incredible magical powers. And by this, he was probably referencing True Ice. In fact, when Sylas got to the Faljord, he could feel the magical power all around him, and the further north he got, the more powerful it was. Of course, this is because at the very north of the Faljord, that's where Lissandra is. And that's where she's using True Ice to hold the Watchers below the Howling Abyss. Now in his story, Sylas did actually encounter True Ice. He met with Vrina, the Scar Mother, which you may recognize from Legends of Runeterra. She is one of Sejuani's followers. And while Sejuani herself is somewhere north with Udyr, Vrina together with the rest were raiding the southern tribes. And there, since some of them are Iceborn, her warriors were wielding True Ice weapons, which of course have the ability to straight up kill you if you touch them unless you are an Iceborn. Sylas wasn't, and so when he tried to disarm one of these warriors, he actually nearly died. But since he survived, because secretly one of the shamans traveling with Rina helped him, because she liked him, the rest thought that Sylas was some kind of a chosen warrior of the gods, because how else he could survive. And so the result of the story were 2 things. The Winter's Claw decided to help Sylas. They would take him further north, and there he would do whatever he wants to do with the True Ice. After which, in return, he would lead the Winter's Claw to the southern lands, and he would help them raid Demacia. If you've been around the channel, you know that I already love Sylas' storyline. It's one of the best stories in League of Legends. And since it doesn't seem to be done just yet, I am happy to see that Riot can still push it a lot further. Now that was the obvious storyline. So now let's get into the interesting ones. First of all, a couple of times in the past, Riot teased that Galio may be hiding some really interesting secrets. It all started with Swain's quote. He's the one who first teased how Petricide works, and that it actually doesn't mitigate magic but absorb it. But he also teased that on top of Galio absorbing magic, there is some kind of secret reason as to why he comes alive. Because under normal circumstances, Petricide doesn't do that. If that was the case, the whole Demacian city would now be walking. So Galio's story is something that will definitely be explored in the future. What's even more interesting though, is that when Swain was first teased, the concept art for his demon also showed us what it might look like. But then when Galio also got his concepts, we could see the same demon being on the parchment that was supposed to describe how Galio works. Curiously enough, this exact parchment also appeared in Lux's comic. However, the demon was kept just outside the frame. So even though we know what the entire parchment looks like, because the designer reworking Galio showed it to us, officially in the lore, that was never revealed. So we still don't know if canonically that parchment still has the demon on it. But if that is the case, that would mean that the reason why Galio can come alive might be linked to demons. And I believe Riot purposefully avoided this because it is a detail that can be used for a really cool future storyline. And speaking of Swain, demons and obvious plot points that are kept as a secret, at number 3 I put the story of Swain and Raum. Now of course we know that Swain's demon is called Raum only because of Fiddlesticks. But regardless, even though Swain's story on its own is already quite cool, I always found it weird that the main part of the story, which is the part where Swain actually talked to the demon locked beneath Noxus, and he somehow tricked him into giving him his hand, that really awesome sounding part was just entirely skipped. All we know is that during the battle for Placidium, Irelia cut off Swain's hand, and as he was dying, a raven approached him. And through the raven's eye, Swain got into contact with the demon of Noxus. This would be Raum. But then the story just said that the two made a deal, but we never learned what kind of deal that was. And strangely enough, both on Twitter and on Reddit, Riot teased two different storylines that might be possible. On one side, Riot teased that Swain made a Faustian deal with the demon. Those of you who paid attention during literature know that Faustus was a man who made a deal with the devil, but while the devil thought that the deal was fair, the favor was actually against him. And so Faustus technically tricked the demon. The same thing might be happening with Swain. It was teased that Swain tricked Raum, and that's why he can wield his power so well. On the other side, from different sources, Riot teased that although Swain is using Raum's power now, in the future it may come at a price. And so the day might come that Raum gets his payback. Whatever the outcome may be, this part of Swain's story was kept open on purpose, because it is absolutely something that Riot will explore in the future. I really don't think there is a way around it. Raum will have to be dealt with at some point in the future. And considering how much people laughed when Fiddlesticks was revealed, and how demonic he was, I think Riot would like to do another demon, and Raum would be a great candidate. For number 2 on my list, I picked the story of Zed and his shadow boxes. You see, although the story of Zed was concluded in his comic, there we learned that Master Kusho just faked his death, and he was forced to face him. The main part of the storyline was still kept open, however. It all started with the Dark Box, that contained the secrets to the Shadow Technique. And it was with this Shadow Technique that Zed, even as a child, became stronger than Shen. And later, after marching with his pupils onto the Kinko Monastery, it was this Dark Box that allowed Zed to teach his students the full scale of the Shadow Technique. And it was this Dark Box that ultimately transformed Master Kusho into a shadowy abomination. Unfortunately though, we never learned what this box really contained, and where it came from. From other stories, it was teased that it might be linked to Nocturne, but that's all we really got. However, after the story of the comic was done, it was mentioned once more in the story A Piece of Shadow Cake, where Xayah and Rakan infiltrated a base of the Shadow Order. Of course, this story retold what happened in the cinematic. We have an entire video on it. And they infiltrated this base to destroy a Quinlon, which is a giant red floating crystal which sucks natural magic from the surrounding lands. But there, as Xayah sneaked inside this place, even though this part was cut off from the cinematic, we could still read about something very interesting that happened there. Let me quote the story directly. She pushed through the vines at the gateway of the temple, then walked into its grand entranceway, with doors broken and strewn on the ground. Dark curving passageways lay open on both sides of her. She ignored them, and instead followed the path the sunlight cut toward vine-covered doorway at the far end of the room. She paused as she passed a small stack of crystal boxes, hidden against the wall. They were odd things. perfectly square and completely soulless, somehow holding no magic at all. In some great act of sacrilege against the world, it was as if their maker had managed not to lay any of his essence, or the essence of their base materials, pass into them. She gave them a wide breath, and crept through a doorway overgrown with black roots. So here, in this story, it was revealed that Xayah found more of these boxes. But even though everything in the world, and especially everything in Ionia, even inanimate objects, have some kind of magical essence in them, these boxes had nothing. And there is something peculiar about this. When it comes to anti-magic, that's how the Watchers were always described. The writers themselves describe the Void as anti-magic. It's the exact opposite of what we can find on Runeterra. But that's really the only clue we got on this. So, this mystery is still something that Riot can definitely explore. And in fact, because they specifically tease this in this story, I am pretty sure at some point they will. And finally, this takes us to the number 1 story. The one that is pretty much unavoidable. I can confidently say this story will be resolved, but as to how or when, for that we'll have to wait. But of course, this grand story that many people may not even know about is the story of Leblanc and Mordekaiser. Now, I mentioned this a couple of times before, but we know that the story of Leblanc will move forward. It was revealed by the writers themselves that they have plans with Leblanc. And they themselves even know when will Leblanc be revealed to the world. Because right now, we technically don't even know what Leblanc is doing in Noxus. Well, we do know about one thing that she's doing. She's actually keeping Runeterra safe. Because you see, after the great conqueror Mordekaiser died, after he was sent to the realm of the dead where he was happy to meet the gods of death, and after he realized that there were no gods of death and so he just decided to become a god himself. After all of this, while Mordekaiser is putting together a massive army of the dead, somewhere in the realm of the dead, on Runeterra we know about one window that leads into his realm. And that would be the very center of the fortress which he built on Runeterra. The one that is now known as the Immortal Bastion of Noxus. You see, in Noxus, the legend of Mordekaiser is known throughout the entire empire. Everyone knows about who Mordekaiser was. Although only very few people, including Leblanc, know about the fact that Mordekaiser is kept locked in the middle of the Immortal Bastion. Or rather, that's the only place where one can pass into the realm of the dead. Now, we don't know what Leblanc is doing, and how she is preventing Mordekaiser from just stepping back into the physical realm, but we know that she is the one responsible for doing it. And this entire part was revealed in the story called Thorns of the Black Rose. And to give you the full context, let me quote the most important part of the story, where she was showing Granth, a general who would later try to assassinate Swain, what is the real purpose of the Black Rose. The story is told from Leblanc's perspective. We stand at the edge of the Great Well of Souls, plunging down into the bedrock of Noxus, far deeper than the physical dimension of the Bastion should even allow. A roiling miasma of cold blues and jealous greens swirls in the distance between us, underlighting the 3 bridges that span the gap. There, between them, suspended against the madness, is a frightful, hulking silhouette that every Noxian knows only too well. A husk of lifeless armor depicted in every history book, and 1,000 defaced statues scattered across the old city. Granth takes a half step back. "It can't be," he murmurs. It can't. His voice is cracking, his eyes glisten with tears. I lean in over his shoulder to whisper behind his ear. "Do you see the truth of it now? The truth behind the great empire of Noxus? So has it been for centuries, since the days of the first kings. No grand general, no emperor or tyrant can stand unless the mistress of the Immortal Bastion allows it. Many are those who would serve, though few prove worthy." I gently plug the lantern from his trembling fingers, and guide him away from the sight that has so transfixed him, toward the veiled alcoves that line the passage on either side. Swain must fall. Our Cabal is utterly committed to this, above all else, and we will sacrifice whatever we must to achieve it. Now, of course, Leblanc is a master of illusions, so we really don't know what was really happening there with Mordekaiser's armor. But it is still clear that the window to his realm is there in the center of Noxus. And we know that Leblanc does have some plans with it. But that will definitely be revealed in the future. It's just a shame that poor General Grant didn't quite succeed at his suicide mission to blow up Swain with him. All of that was in the Black Powder story. But who knows, maybe Grant is with Mordekaiser now. Still, the best thing about all of this is that the Sisterhood of War series is connected to this storyline. There we learned that entire party of Noxians was sent into Ionia to find Riven and recover her blade, which was forged in Noxus. And the person who sent them on that mission was either the Faceless, one of the leaders of Noxus, or it was LeBlanc. So either way, if you remember the ending of that story, because right now Riven is on her way to Noxus, and because her blade is heavily tied to whatever LeBlanc is doing, once LeBlanc's storyline moves forward, we should expect even more story for Riven.